So this dead woman surprises everyone when she shows up to her own funeral, alive. Now her name's Nuolla, and her husband is this guy, who we'll call B. And they've been together for about 10 years. But one day, B gets suspicious. He thinks Nuolla might be cheating on him and that she might leave him for another man. And no matter what B does, he just can't shake this feeling. So at this point, he has a couple of options. He can A, confront her, B, divorce her, or C, hire some hitmen to unalive her. And yeah, he's gonna go with option C. Now Nuolla and B live in Melbourne, Australia. But sometimes she travels back home to her hometown in Burundi, Africa to visit. And B, he decides to have her executed there. So he calls up some goons he knows in Burundi, and he pays them the equivalent of $4,500 and he tells them the next time Nuolla comes into town, unalive her. And the goons are like, okay, cool. And then months go by and everything seems normal. But then one day, boom, Nuolla's stepmom passes away back in Burundi, and she has to fly back there to attend the funeral. So she flies there, goes to the funeral, and then after the funeral, she's at her hotel. And she's feeling kind of down because it was just a funeral, and she goes outside to get some fresh air. And that is when suddenly, out of nowhere, a man appears, and he comes straight at her, and he pulls out a pew-pew, and he points it at her, and he's like, if you scream, I'll shoot you. And then he makes her get into his car. And in the car, she's sitting between two other guys, and they both have pew-pews. And then they blindfold her and they speed away. About 30 minutes later, the car stops and the kidnappers get out. And they take Nuolla into some kind of building and they tie her to a chair. And there is where this other guy comes out. We'll call him Leader. So Leader comes right up to Nuolla and he's like, what did you do to this man to make him want to unalive you? And Nuella's like, what man? And Leader's like, your husband, dummy. Your husband paid us to unalive you. And Nuella's like, my husband? B would never do that. And so Leader puts his phone on speaker and he dials B's number. And Leader's like, hey B, we have your wife. And then suddenly Nuolla hears B's voice on the line. And B's like, kill her. And this moment makes Nuella's whole world come crashing down. And it's all just too much. And she eventually gets overwhelmed and she passes out. Sometime later, she wakes up and she's still there, tied to a chair. And Leader, he comes over to her and he's like, okay, we've decided we're not gonna unalive you. We don't actually unalive women and children. And he also says that even though he's not gonna unalive her, he still plans on keeping B's money. He then calls B back and asks him for more money to finish the job. He asks for an extra, the equivalent of $2,200. And B's like, fine, I'll pay more. Just do it. And eventually later, Leader tells B, okay, we did it. Your wife is dead. And B pays him. He goes to Western Union and he wires him the money. And at this point, 2 days have gone by and Nuolla is still being held captive. But finally, Leader comes to her and he says, okay, I'm gonna let you go. And he gives her an envelope. And in that envelope is evidence, a cell phone memory card and a Western Union receipt for all the money he had received. And he wants Nuolla to use that evidence against B. Then they all put Nuolla in a car and they drive out to the middle of somewhere and they drop her off on the side of the road. And the Leader says to her, go tell other stupid women like you what happened here. And then they just drive away. Now Nuolla is just glad to be alive, but this definitely isn't over for her because she needs to get B back for what he's done. So she flies from Burundi to Melbourne. Meanwhile, B is still in Melbourne and he's already told everyone that Nuolla died in some tragic accident back in Burundi. And he holds a funeral service for her at their house. And then all these people that know Nuolla show up to this memorial service. And while they're there, a car pulls up outside and Nuella's in it. And there she spots B and she gets out of the car and she walks right up to him and she's like, surprise, bitch, I'm still alive. And he is shocked. Like, I'm sure everyone there was shocked that she showed up to her own damn funeral and B is Anyway, Nuolla eventually gives the memory card and the Western Union receipts and all the evidence against B to the police. And then police arrest B, and I can't find a mugshot of him, but here's what he looks like in real life. And he goes to court, he pleads guilty to incitement of murder, and he gets 9 years in prison. So shout out to Africa and Australia.